Good afternoon, everyone. Mark Sanders, actually now called Principal of Network Cloud. We've gone through a restructure in the business just fairly recently. For those that don't know, Telstra is a full services network provider. We have wireless and fixed. We have it across consumer and enterprise services, the largest telco in Australia. Today I'm going to tell you about some of our technology transformation that we've been undertaking inside of the organisation and some of the learnings from that. In particularly, how we have looked at using evolutionary principles, how we've run ourselves as a service organisation, and some of the changes we've had to embrace around our people, culture, and our skills. So telcos have gone through, and service providers, lots of changes over the decades, from analogue appliances and switching to digital. Now we're going through probably a larger and more complex one to virtualisation, and we're already looking ahead at artificial intelligence and how that's applied overall to our networks. But overall, we're leaning in and facing into ever-increasing levels of complexity, and change is constant. It's almost infinite, the complexity we're looking at, and we've got many uncertain futures. It requires us to change and adapt how we're doing. At the moment, our default capabilities as organisations and service providers is not going to keep pace with that change and that complexity that we're leaning into. So we need to adapt and move to these evolutionary principles. A lot of service providers already today have talked about the pressures their businesses are under. We at Telstra see that there's going to be a 5 times growth in our network traffic in the next 5 years. We have probably similar or ARPUs that we've got around us and ever-increasing competition. So try to do this and really adopt NFVi and drive cost out of how we work and do it in a better way. We must figure it out. And there's a degree of urgency, which I've heard a lot of speakers talk about today as well. So there's 3 foundational pieces. One is designed for evolution as a first principle. Not because we have to evolve from where we are to where we're going, but we have to always anticipate that evolution will need to continue to occur, that there will be the next change and the one after. And we have to find ways to bake into and accept that change is going to be constant. There is no business as usual anymore. And the fuzziness of the uncertainty we need to embrace and build into how we operate our business. We need to structure our businesses into service organisations and build them up around business domains or technology domains or both. And a common theme at these first couple of days is how do we do these changes in our organisation, the people, the culture and the capabilities. And in many ways this is a bigger challenge than the technology transformation to get the benefits and unlock them that we need to do. The program we established a little while ago was known as the Networks 2020 program. We established an operating framework around how we wanted to operate that program. Started off, of course, as a technology transformation to deal with that large growth and drive out cost out of how we're operating. But very quickly, as you can see, it's evolved to be far more about technology. Key things that I'll probably be talking a little bit more about today is how we've adopted some of our principles and our processes to underpin it, and in particular the capabilities that we need to have in the skill sets. This framework is a rallying point for our organisation. It's all those components need to work together to really propel the company forward and see us be successful. As we're doing a technology transformation, as technologists, what are the first thing we often do? We start writing architectures, start writing blueprints, and we very quickly realised that that was not the right approach, and we needed to step back and be far more fundamental around assessing what we were trying to achieve, creating a high-level story, a narrative on our strategy, where we were going, the North Star, the directions we were taking. Sitting behind that, we then had to look at our principles. Principles is writing them down, distributing them across the organisation and having each of us follow those principles. Principles which when we're faced with making some complex technology decisions, we can always trace back and can assist us and help us in making those decisions as we move forward. Principles, some obvious ones is, let's start with the principle of virtualising everything where we can and where possible. Principles around automation, seems obvious, but it's something we need to always ask ourselves, can this process, can this step, can this action be virtualised, can it be automated, sorry. And if we're repeating the same process more than a few times in our day-to-day business, we need to look at how that process can in fact be automated. We then built upon the principles into practices. Practices are the application of the principles. If we're looking to adopt agile technologies, it's the tool set we're using. If we're doing automation, it's the policy engine we're adopting. It's the data structures we're looking to use to support it. This all supports, and we need to be very clear of the outcomes we're looking to achieve. And for most service providers, and as I said, as leading to this introduction, we needed to do this at much greater scale, much lower cost, with much greater agility. But most importantly, serve our customers in a better way, make our networks more resilient, more fault tolerant, and give our customers a much greater experience. A key point of those principles was how we organise ourselves into domains. Not a new concept for service providers, but we were very clear and set very clear expectations around what a domain needed to do. And as we set our organisation up into the teams and into the squads, and we matrix those groups and teams together, and more so than ever, they're looking to use services from each other and collaborate from each other, we have to be very clear around what domains needed to do. And domains need to expose and publish those services, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. Domains need to implement very clear autonomous systems around how they do lifecycle management, how they do activation, assurance, how they plan and evolve what they're doing in a very incremental way, and how they develop their services. And they need to support all the operational functions to run that domain through published APIs. The domains need to communicate with each other. You need to consume services from other domains, and you need other domains to consume your services to get the agility you require. The world that most of us has probably recognised is the world on the left, where we've got bespoke evolution of our architecture into the layers of infrastructure, element management systems, control systems, numerous appliances in the physical world, and of course we're leaning into the virtual world that we've got at the moment. Probably several instances of virtualisation many organisations have kicked off for one reason or another. And somehow we need to connect them up into the OSS and BSS systems that drive all these things. And we've done a lot of point integrations to connect these things together. And this is actually an anti-pattern to what we talked about as being an evolutionary principle. This is costly and time-consuming to try and evolve and change any service construct. Moving forward, and we're well down the path of doing this, we've put an abstraction layer in the middle of all this. We've got the domains, which as I said before, very clear what domains need to do, very clear around how they need to expose their services. Those services are then exposed up into a service catalogue into the network as a service and made available for other domains to consume those services, or for the OSS and business systems to be able to consume them downwards into the stack. Very important that we drive commonality around the APIs, and we're rapidly moving to use the TMF APIs, particularly for activation and provisioning. The diagram on the right allows us to decouple those business systems from the underlying network systems that sit below them. NFVi is in fact a domain exposing services as we conceptualise it within the organisation, and a lot of discussion's been around has NFV or NFVi been able to realise the cost benefits that we all aspired for and set out to do. And there's many ways to do it. There's many organisations in various phases, but you tend to see that as they go through their journey, they quickly realise it's not just about putting a V in front of a function and saying we've virtualised. Many groups and many organisations are going through an evolution as they seek to drive that cost out. And they started off with the physical appliance. They probably fairly quickly moved to decoupling the software on that physical appliance and potentially putting it onto virtualised infrastructure, and probably even call that a cloud. As you can see, it's certainly not. And what tends to occur in large service providers, including inside Telstra, is that integration pattern's repeated over and over, because you've got a group, a business, a domain that wants to run their component of the network, where they once would have had a physical appliance, they've now got a virtual appliance, and so they build a virtualised environment or to host that on. And we end up with several very unique and decoupled silos that we start to evolve. You very quickly see that this is going against some of the objectives we set out to do, drive cost out around how we want to scale our network. So we're now moving towards something we're terming a common NFVi, where we have the different internal groups and teams that have a virtual appliance using and consuming services from the common NFVi group and team that I head up. That presents a lot of challenges, and I'll talk a little bit about them today. And the last phase which we're looking into, which we think is very important, is how we disaggregate those layers of the technology stack. That we can take a greater ownership around selecting the technology, getting the performance and optimisation tuning where we need to do it, and in some places where we see there's commodity items that we need to procure, we're getting the benefits of competitive tension and the commoditisation, getting the benefits of the key technology control points where we need them today. Today, we've got a range of technologies to hit those optimisations, SRIV, DPDK, NUMA pinning. In the future, we're looking forwards to open source NFVi systems using offload techniques, hardware acceleration, and greater levels of automation. So the common NFVi group, as I said, we set out to be smarter around how we use the company's resources, how we needed to pull the company's assets and resources and have them consumed by many internal groups across the organisation. The objective is to transform the network into that composable and programmable infrastructure at much higher scale at a much lower cost. And as a domain, it set out to define its own principles, avoid duplication across the organisation, disaggregate the layers of technology, use open standards and open frameworks, really drive for the optimisation, particularly the data plane services where we needed to, commoditise where we needed to, focus on how we promote within the industry carrier grade technologies. I'll talk a bit about that. Automate everything as a first principle. Look at how the common NFVi group and team can assist those internal tenants and consumers of the service for onboarding and certification into the environment, and speed that up at a lower cost, as opposed to them each having to do it and go through it. And a lot of discussion today at this conference, but really zoom on exactly what cloud native services are. And we've modelled that across 5 major different types of VNF workloads as well. I won't go through them. But in summary, NFVi, the common group or the common NFVi is a service in its own right. It's exposed as a domain up through the network as a service. And it's orchestrated and commanded by other tenants and domains. The common NFVi group is a service organisation. We're servicing not necessarily external customers, but internal groups within our organisation, groups that would have once built a vertical silo in their own right. And rather than each of those groups having to go through and establish that centre of excellence, the key skills that they need to have and procure those assets, we want to pull the smart people in the organisation. We want to establish common processes that sit across the group. What we want to have is the people that build great networks, whether it's IMS or wireless or the enterprise services, to actually focus on doing that as their great job and core skill within the organisation, and leverage where they can off the common NFVi group, and have the confidence that that group has created a service as good or better as they would have created if they had built the vertical themselves. But it hasn't been easy getting there. Having an organisation that had along with a lot of organisations, very strong vertical lines of business, the mindset shift in operating in this way of working has been quite immense. Each group would have KPIs, objectives, projects, demand they need to hit inside of the network, and having them to think vastly different around how they would leverage a service from another internal group was a significant mind shift, and made a lot of progress inside the organisation and continue to do so. Some workloads, some groups have very complex transitions that they need to go to be able to use a common NFVi, and we need to work with them very, very, very closely. What you see there is some of the feedback, some of the verbatims around groups that had their point of view and around, or concerns around how they needed to operate in this mode. Where do we go from here as NFVi as a service organisation? A couple of things I'd like to sort of leave the group with. One is carrier grade. How do we have an always-on experience? I've heard the term today, we'll solve that problem by moving to cloud native, yet I don't see a lot of deep discussion on exactly what that means. A lot of discussion on containerisation and how we adopt it, but what does it mean for the VNS? How do they horizontally scale themselves out? How are they fault tolerant? How do we do non-intrusive upgrades and changes? For anyone that has operated an NFVi platform, you very quickly see you've got a lot of migration of workloads and movement to carefully plan around how you do your upgrades. And how do we continue to optimise it at all layers? Some things I'd like to ask of the industry and all of us is get the quality of software up and higher. Industry to align on VNF onboarding and packaging and certification methods. Accelerate a lot quicker. A lot of discussion today has been around how we speed up NFVi adoption for all of us and the benefit for that in the industry, but the acceleration to containers and microservices and having them in the VNS in cloud native. Embrace the disaggregation concept. I've seen a few slides this morning around what it would take and the integration challenges that comes with that. We need to all solve for that. Not see if you're a supplier that as a fear or a problem, but embrace it and the benefits it's going to come with it around how the size of the pie and the acceleration of NFVi will help us all. We need to, as an industry, continue to, and operators, share experiences amongst each other. Some great stories already from this conference. ONAP, we're very excited about ONAP. Keen to see how it can be commercialised. It's a very complex sort of code that needs to be somehow packaged up, distributed, release managed, and supported. And a lot of business models without, that could occur, but while I talked earlier in this speech around how we needed to, as a company, build a centre of excellence and our competency up, there's areas we need help on. And that would be, I think, an area that the supplier community can certainly help us with. And mature cross-domain and closed-loop assurance. Here it's spoken a lot, but there's lots of loops to close. We need a common way and standard way to do that. That's where I think the complexity and the challenges do come in. So to close out, you've heard a little bit around our transformation. We as service providers are all leaning into very complex and uncertain times. The rate of change is accelerating. You don't need to stumble your way through that rate of change. If you adopt evolutionary principles, you have a service organisation, you address the people and culture components of it, we can get through this. It's all up to you and it's all up to us. Thank you. Is there any questions?
We have literally 1 minute, but did you have something, Brian? Please ask it. Yep. We have some microphones around here. Go right ahead.
Okay, you mentioned non-exclusive driving that.
Yeah,
Let's do the question again. Sorry.
Yeah, I can repeat the question. Okay, it was you mentioned non-x86 compute on one.
Yes, I start the principle that we need to continue to optimise the technology stack. x86 compute can be CPU intensive for some specific workloads. One that comes to mind is encryption. There's several others. AI as well. So it would be per unit of compute per cost, it's lower. So that's why we're highly interested in it. Now, that in itself won't get us to success because we need to get the VNF provider to create the VNF, we need to orchestrate it, we need to expose those resources, we need to manage the inventory of it all the way through. So there's a whole development chain that needs to occur. But the simple answer is lowering cost for particular workloads other than a compute node.